we're shifting from the old way to the new way. And the trends that are making this shift are the fact that it's getting more and more expensive to sell things directly from paid social. SEO is getting harder and harder. And so what does that leave marketers to do? Like, how can we get the attention and keep the attention of people trying to sell to, especially in B2B?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Small Business Mentor podcast, where we shine a light on the black holes of business growth with your host, Alan Pence. In each episode, we explore the leaps and bounds entrepreneurs make as they push their businesses beyond the 1 million mark into the realm of professional sustainable growth. Stay with us as we navigate the journey from brute force to finesse.
So today we've got a very special guest, Tom Hunt, who's the founder and owner of Fame, a podcast agency, and it's a little bit of inside baseball here because his company produces this podcast and many others. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
I've listened to quite a few of these episodes, so I'm honored to be part of it.
Tom has an awesome podcast too, by the way. Confessions of a B2B entrepreneur, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. The rebrand. Thank you.
Cool. So give us a little bit of background on Fame, like how you started, what was sort of the thesis, and like what it's grown to.
So I, in 2019, was head of demand generation at a B2B software company. And I was reviewing the customer personas. This is what you do when you're a marketer. We decided to focus on a specific customer persona, the sales ops person. And so really, if you're trying to sell to someone, you have to understand them first. So I reached out to a load of sales ops people on LinkedIn to see if they would jump on a call with me. Obviously, they just ignored me completely. So the masterstroke was to create Sales Ops Demystified, the podcast where we'd interview these people. And the primary goal was just literally to learn about them. But it turned out that they actually did become a good customer persona for us. And so we were like releasing episodes, getting a bit of inbound SEO. We're getting some attention on LinkedIn because the guests were sharing. But then something awesome happened. And the 11th guest was the VP of Sales Ops at Intercom. They went on to buy our software for their whole 83-person sales team. And so that was a 9 to 10x ROI on the podcast growth program within 6 months. So for me, it was kind of like the holy grail of B2B because you're always searching for like the quick attributable ROI, but then you're also searching for the long-term brand building benefits. And so this was a growth program or a marketing strategy is another way of saying that can achieve those. So I left, they became the first client. They are still a client today, 4.5 years later. And then all we've really done is have copied and pasted that process to between, I think we're up to 100 clients as of June 2024, so 4.5 years on. Yeah, it's plastered everywhere. 3.8 million ARR run rate at the moment. So, but thank you. But also because I've been following Crabtree and your work and this podcast, and the black hole theory is something that really resonated with me. And so we had one around just past the 2 million mark. And I think the reason for that was probably lack of leadership or lack of
management.
Yeah, exactly. So I was basically in the weeds doing a lot of the client work, also doing all the sales, all the marketing, and there was no other people in the company to manage those areas. And so I think the key was like taking a step back, promoting some people into 3 core positions, allowing me to be more strategic. That has enabled us to go from like the 2.5 to the 3.8, and it's going okay now, but I'm sure we'll hit another black hole soon.
Did you stay in sales?
Out of the last 3-6 months, I don't do anything there anymore.
So how do you do lead generation at this point?
For the majority of the time of the business, Google, half organic, half paid, has worked well. I think we got the timing right, basically. Like we've been bidding on terms like B2B podcast agency on Google for 4.5 years and it still works. And then we also have been able to do some organic stuff to rank well for those terms organically. So I think we got lucky there, and it's a very obvious thing, like very clear search intent, and we got the timing right. So at least in the early days, there wasn't that much competition. There is more competition now. More recently, LinkedIn organic mainly through my profile, but also through there's about 5 to 10 people from the team that post regularly. Is close to overtaking Google in terms of the inbound.
And I want to talk about this in depth, but let's finish the black hole piece. So the around 2 million, it was about structuring more management in the organization. So what were the leads that you appointed? Like what kind of positions?
Yeah, exactly. Like I was probably doing 5 jobs badly. And so it was about promoting internally people to do one job well. So the 3 functions of the business are account management, operations, and growth. So we now have a head of account management, head of operations, head of growth. They're very clear like OKRs and numbers. They were all promoted internally from the account manager role, which is like the key role for us. That's like 90% of the day-to-day running of the company. And then I get there in the remaining 10%.
So like what I just did a tweet the other day where it's like growth leads to chaos. And that's basically what probably happened to you. You grew, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got all this stuff to manage. And then you gotta work on the chaos for a little while. Sounds like you were able to do that and grow at the same time, which is great.
Well, yeah, we did like top, if we did like a graph of monthly revenue, it did like top off a little bit and like stay pretty consistent, and now we've come through it again. But I also feel like we're probably getting to the chaos stage again, and the revenue might like top off a bit, and then we'll have to work out how to evolve.
Yeah, like if once you grow past 5, I think you probably hit the black hole a little early, so you got that adjusted, and sounds like you did well. And then it'll be somewhere past 5 where like the amount of clients and new work will create another. It's a little harder to actually figure out exactly what will break above 5 because there's not as much data. I don't think it's pretty clear what happens below, like over 1 million, 2 million. It's always like internal operations, right? Start breaking down because you've brought in all these new clients and you don't have a structure. And then what I found for me was really what was crucial when we got toward 10. It wasn't really at 5. It was more, we kind of shot past 5 after we figured it out. Granted, we stayed there for as long as you've existed as a company. So I was stuck there longer. It was all about how to scale sales. So, my sales cycle is a lot different than yours, right? It's more personal. It's very structured based on the government, the way they do it. But it was really like, how could we get past me being a good salesperson one-on-one and having, some other people like you have that can do that, a few people at the top, to like a structured process that produces replicable results over and over. And that just took me so long.
Even without you.
Yeah, even without. Now I'm not involved in sales at all. Just reviewing it, right? But that was a real unlock for me. I think it might be a little different for you because you've got this structured, you've got this, it's a little more, Google ads, organic. Yeah.
Transactional sale. It takes like 30 days because obviously as subscription, we're essentially a subscription business. As we grow and add more clients, if the retention number or percentage stays the same, or the churn percentage stays the same, by definition, for us to grow, we have to add more clients. And so ideally, we want to try and improve the churn number, but then we also need to work out how to keep adding more clients every month. And so that kind of is my goal, which is probably why I spent so much time on LinkedIn, was to do the top of the funnel to drive more proposal requests, to drive more deals.
So let's go into this a little bit. So I think what you're showing now is it requires you to sell. And like you were able to do that with Google Words and some SEO, right? But to really push it past where it is, you're building like a personal brand around it, right?
I think so, yeah. To grow faster, the thing that I think is most likely to work is my personal brand. And maybe I shouldn't be doing that. Maybe I should try and make outbound work.
No, I disagree. I think that your brand is the most important thing. And like often I say that you shouldn't try to get sales totally structured beyond you until past 10 million. And maybe that's not given the differences in businesses, it might not be as relevant, but I do see you doing personal brand is just crucial, right? And then you get to a point where then maybe that won't work as much anymore, or at least it's producing, it's not going to keep increasing at some point, and then you got to figure out the next thing, and that might be more structured or something, but you'll be a different company then with a lot more resources and a lot more ability to do stuff, right? So I think that's the right move. Sounds to me. It's driving good growth.
It's driving nice growth. Also, the hidden benefit was the hiring. Like, I feel like the key role for us is the account manager, the basically responsible for the success of the podcast. And so us getting good account managers is a crucial lever. And I feel like we're able to get better account managers at the same starting salary cost than we were previously, because of the impressions.
What do you attribute that to?
Mainly my posting on LinkedIn, supported by other people in the team. Because, and I want to talk about this, like, ideally with LinkedIn, in terms of content selection, you want to align what you're actually doing in your day-to-day life, what you're passionate about, and what you can make money from. Now, what happened with my LinkedIn profile is that I just went pretty hard on the like HR, all that remote work stuff, which I'm passionate about. I'm doing it every day, but it doesn't really align with, like, we don't sell to HR people, you know. But what it has done is elevated Fame's employer brand. And so we went from like 50 to 500 AM applications in the month of March this year when I really focused on LinkedIn.
Whoa. And you attribute most of that to the remote kind of stuff?
To my posting on LinkedIn, and the topics were like HR, remote work.
Ooh, I think I should do that more.
Culture management. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really
on LinkedIn specifically. It doesn't work as well on Twitter.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, your employees. I don't want my employees finding me on Twitter anyway. So I think LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn. It's very different. These different social networks. So, and that kind of leads to me to talk a little bit about what is happening with marketing. So I'm trying to do a series of these, right? And there's a lot of talk now about how like SEO is basically dying. Like Google is making it so that basically your organic reach is going down all the time. We're moving toward the perplexity.ai future, which I use basically every day. So I'm like creating the problem and I want like an answer, right? I don't want 10 blue links. I want an answer. And then Google's sort of moving to that as well. So you're part of this new ecosystem. It's like, how do you market in the future? And I guess here we're talking in particular like B2B, right? I mean, there's going to be a different answer for B2C. But it feels like we're moving to this world where it's like paid social goes into a series of things that you own that create like a brand around the company. And it's helpful that it's a personal brand. So, it's a newsletter, it's a podcast, it's something that you regularly post and control. And that becomes sort of like the center of your marketing. So talk a little bit about how you see that. Do you think that's true? What's not true about that?
The way Adam Robinson puts it, he's also guesting your show. It's like we're shifting from the old way to the new way. And the trends that are making the shift are the fact that it's getting more and more expensive to sell things directly from paid social. SEO is getting harder and harder. And so what does that leave marketers to do? Like, how can we get the attention and keep the attention of people we're trying to sell to, especially in B2B? And so our theory actually behind the company Fame is that a B2B buyer is probably in the buying window for your complex software or service for maybe 3 months every 3 years. And so we really just want to get them to know, like, and trust you in that 2.7 years when they're not in the buying window. So when they do need you, they come directly to you. And so your acquisition cost is essentially zero when they do come into the buying window, but you've been educating them and adding value for the whole time. And so what does that mean? You have to create content that they like. And if you do that, they'll start to know, like, and trust you. So then the question is, how do you do that? I believe Fame sits at the bottom of that funnel. The podcast is hard to grow, but when you get an audience, the relationship you build is very, very deep. And it's probably the best place to get people to know, like, and trust you. And so what sits above that is, I believe, or in my opinion, we have organic social at the top. And then the next step, which I actually think is kind of optional, is in the middle, which is the email newsletter. There, we're also taking people off platform, so we actually own that audience, which is important. And then at the bottom, we have the podcast. Again, that's pretty much an owned audience because you have people subscribe to your RSS feed. And so then paid can be used at in my opinion, any stage of those three areas to amplify the content that's working well, in my opinion. If I recommend like anyone starting, like you're a B2B company, you're in the marketing team, is to pick a person and then choose one organic or one social platform to build that person's profile organically first. That's where you start. And then you either go to the podcast or go to newsletter. Ultimately, you want all three, but I don't think you need both podcast and newsletter at the start. Well, this is what's working for us for B2B, and this is where I see a lot more people moving towards.
So you still see the organic channels as being valuable to build, right? So building on X and LinkedIn and things like that, right?
Well, yeah, I took my LinkedIn from 25,000 to 125,000 followers in like 3 to 4 months. And the impact it had, like no paid at all. The impact it had was like phenomenal. Like, as I mentioned, 50 to 500 applications for our key role and record breaking numbers in terms of proposal requests.
What do you attribute that growth to?
I think there's 3 things that I started doing differently. But the backdrop is I spent 10 years copywriting and I like learning the trade, But the 3 things I started doing differently is actually engaging. And so this is very LinkedIn specific. I don't know how much this can be translated because I haven't got Twitter to work that well yet. I've only been trying it for a couple of months. Is actually engaging and building relationships with other people that have the audience that you want to get in front of. And so this is so laborious and it's so boring, but you just have to do half an hour a day of like commenting and engaging with people, DMing people. Second is that alignment piece I was talking about. We have to be posting once a day if we're trying to maximize results. And you're only going to be able to create content good enough to get that organic reach if you're doing that stuff every day, if you're passionate about it. And then ideally, this is what you want to get right, is that the content you're posting about is aligned with the thing you sell. So you have some kind of monetization. I kind of drifted off that because I was going for the impressions. But it still has benefits. So that's the second thing. And then the third mindset piece, again, LinkedIn specific, is just make sure every post is an experiment. Often posts that I thought would not work at all worked really well. And so then every post I'm learning and then trying to improve every day. So I was posting every day, I think since like October last year, and I only started popping off in March, probably because I spent that time 3 months, so 100 posts, 90 posts, learning what works. So those are the 3 things that I did differently.
So what I see happening, right? And so we mentioned Adam Robinson, who was on your podcast and he was on mine last week. He got really good at the algorithm on LinkedIn as well. And so what I see happen, or anecdotally at least, I'm not that in it day to day, is that each social network has to create, I mean, they basically all saw TikTok, right? So they were all like these kind of social media groups where it was based on, well, I won't try to characterize it before, but basically now they saw, hey, everyone's like reading or watching these videos on TikTok and it comes one after the other and it's not necessarily about the connections and stuff. So they all decided, hey, we've got to start tweaking our algorithms to get similar levels of engagement. And so if you understand that algorithm or work toward it or study it, like you said, like put in the time, you can grow based on their pathway that they've put, right? But eventually, once they get enough of that engagement, they're going to start charging you for it, right? Because they're going to say, all right, well, we've got what we want. We're at 100%. So now we're going to ratchet it to 50% so that we can make more money. And then they're going to figure out the next thing that they need to do. And then you're just like always on this hamster wheel, right? And that's fine. That's totally makes sense because as long as you're converting those people down the funnel, but just realize you're on rented ground and that ground can shift at any point. And that the only way to stay ahead as a marketer is just keep watching the algorithm, keep doing what you're doing, like half an hour every day, doing it over and over. And like for a lot of people, that's just like a brutal like grind going forward.
I agree. But I think it's also a good skill set to develop. But yeah, should like the CEO of a company be spending 50% of their time doing this, which is what I did this year? I'm not sure if that is the right reason. I will share something with a guy called Guillaume Mubesh, who is the founder of a company a group called Lempire. The main tool is called Lemlist, pretty bootstrapped SaaS company. I interviewed him on my show mid last year, and he surprised me by saying that he is $25 million SaaS company, spends 60-70% of his time on personal brand. And I was like, what the you're the CEO of the company. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll try it out. And I did, and it did have a big impact on the.
I think it's 100%. So I think what you're showing is like, it's not quite the bleeding edge. I mean, I think a few people have figured this out, but it still isn't like the norm. First of all, SaaS is in a total bloodbath right now, right? Public valuations aren't great. Private is, very questionable. At a certain point, the money just isn't flowing like it did. I mean, I guess if you're in some like really hot AI vertical, it is, but you're just not getting the same amount of money. And so these guys were just fighting an arms race on Google and Meta and all that kind of stuff, trying to acquire customers. And I don't think that the founders were that focused on the personal brand part. And I think pretty soon you're going to see funding for SaaS companies go to people who have personal brands because they can grow the company. And so like that's going to be part of your ability to get money, right?
So he literally said that last night at dinner with the founder of a HR AI startup. She's responsible for the customers, getting customers. And I was like, okay, so when are you going to raise the next round? And I was like, just focus on personal brand. If you build this big LinkedIn audience, the investors are going to come. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, I think that like what Adam talked about was really kind of opened my eyes. It's like he spent a long time on LinkedIn learning the algorithm, and he was kind of misdirected for a little while. Then he said when he honed in on his core person back last Labor Day, then he really took off over the next 8 months. And then he's able to build 16 weeks. He's at, close to $1 million ARR for a new company, a new offering. And it's like, this is what, if I were sitting there in one of these seed funds, I'd be like, what are you doing to build your brand? If you're doing B2B SaaS stuff, be like, what are you doing to build your brand? So when we launch, we're going to go, right? That's what I'd be looking at doing. And oh, by the way, they're going to have to come hire agencies like yours to figure out how to do it, right? So
exactly right, for the bottom piece for the podcast.
Right. But I do think that, like, particularly with LinkedIn, and we probably shouldn't even be talking about this on a podcast, but I think there's a limited shelf life of where this is going to work really well. Because all of a sudden, every SaaS company in the world is going to be out there, and every founder is going to be building content, and it'll just become another arms race. And of course, LinkedIn will have gotten what it wants, so it'll start charging you for it, right? And then it'll just go right back to being the Google, Facebook, Meta problem all over again.
Yeah. So then, what's next?
I don't know. We got to figure out. We got to talk to my kids and figure out TikTok or something. I don't know until it gets banned in the United States, but. Yeah, no, I think this is a cycle that we're going to go through. And, but what my message is doing this series and my messages is like, go out and do this as soon as possible and capture those people into these owned things so that get while the getting's good, as they say.
I think even in the arms race, the people who produce the best content will still get attention. It's just going to get harder. And so the sooner you start, the better you're going to get. And so the longer you'll be able to last when everyone else comes in.
The other thing I was going to mention is just something I heard through the grapevine is that you talked about the newsletter and podcast difference. I'd be curious your take on those. But what I've been hearing is that these big newsletters, that have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, like what they're doing is they're doing the meta ads. They're going to Instagram and Facebook and maybe LinkedIn, I don't know. Because the ad rates that they're getting on the newsletter side are higher than the meta ads. So they're just arbitraging the difference, right? They're saying I can go get on Instagram for $1.50, $2.50, whatever it is. And then I can sell that eyeball for $4. I don't know what it is. I actually don't know the newsletter stats as well. But there's definitely an arbitrage going on there.
When I mentioned about paid earlier, I think that paid on social, in my opinion, for B2B and personal brands should be used to amplify the content that's already performing well organically. But I do agree that for the email and the podcast level, well, actually, for the email level, I think the direct spend to get subscribers can work. And I'll comment on your point in a minute. For podcast, paid spend now for me has to kind of be connected with social, e.g. you post a clip from the podcast, get that performing well organically, like post loads of them, and then you boost the ones that are performing best. That social content gets more exposure, gets you more followers there, but then you also link to the podcast in the comments because it's a clip from the podcast. So that's how I use paid at social and podcast. paid direct, I think, can work for the email newsletter. Though I think what you're saying, it might just be limited for these like the top ones. Like if these like big name newsletters like Sahil Bloom, etc., can attract like bigger ad dollars because they're like these big newsletters. I'm not sure like the new person starting out is going to be able to go to Facebook to get the subscribers to then arbitrage on their ad rates. But that's my theory, not experience.
I think you're 100% right. I mean, they can go to Meta to get the subscriber. They just don't have the higher ad price to arbitrage, right? But I do think, like, look, if I had a SaaS idea right now and I was like, all right, I'm going to go build the new CRM for blah, 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 AI enabled, whatever I have to do to be hip and on target now.
You absolutely nailed that SaaS idea, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically how most of these things start, right? I'm AI for a certain recruiting vertical or something like that. I'm selling to HR people. Like, I probably would go pay for a bunch of meta ads to convert people to my newsletter, right? So, look, if I could spend $2 a lead, which is, after some period of time, subscriber, after some period of time, that's probably realistic, right? And you get 50,000 subscribers. So you spent, 100K plus. You probably spent some money before it got to $2. And then I can convert 1 to 2% of my audience to I don't know, call it $10,000 a year SaaS cost. I've got a $10 million ARR company and I spent 100. I mean, obviously I have to make the software. I don't know. ChatGPT can do that. But for customer acquisition, you spent $100,000. If that math works, that's insane.
Well, I'm hearing you're very bullish on newsletters.
Yes, I'm bullish because, you have your own property. And if you can use, again, you're just arbitrage. Like, how much would you have to spend on Meta to get someone to subscribe to your CRM or your recruiting tool for some kind of HR vertical? A fuck ton, right? Let's just put it that way. And like your customer acquisition costs would be terrible. But if you can convert them to a newsletter or a podcast, and that's the other thing. I think a newsletter is a higher conversion rate, and then you're advertising basically your solution through the newsletter. But on a podcast, you probably have a higher conversion rate because the people are actually subscribing and listening regularly. They're much more engaged than a newsletter subscriber, right? So same thing, you do it on both.
I would agree, like kick off the newsletter, start spending 10 grand a month, etc. And then if you're halfway through before you're going to sell the software, I would start the podcast. And it could even be solo episodes with you, the founder, but also probably with other influencers in space, because also then they would promote it and help get more traffic for the user. And then what that's going to do is basically get you in the ears of the subscribers as they're coming in. And then when you go and pitch the software, I think it's going to be much more, the conversion rate should be higher.
So tell me a little bit about podcasts themselves. Okay. So we talked about it being a kind of bottom of funnel. It's a more like direct relationship, right? What have you guys seen that works? Like, is it longer in depth? Is it short bite size? Is it, I guess to some extent it depends on the audience, but give us a little idea of like what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the bottom of the funnel piece. The podcast is like at the bottom of my like hierarchy of audience building for B2B, but in the content of the podcast would technically in content marketing terms be more top of the funnel, because we're not talking about the client software at all in it. It's more like a building the audience play, if that makes sense. So it's not like an interview with a product person about how good the product is. It's an interview with somebody else about the industry. Okay, cool. So what makes a good podcast? For me, the pivot.
It's a bottom of the funnel for lead for like bringing people into your property. So it's like a lead acquisition thing. It's not the conversion part, which goes down farther, right? That would be how I'd correct.
The bottom of the audience building funnel, the top of the content marketing funnel. For me, podcasting, like the first thing we have to nail is the positioning. If we get the positioning right, everything else gets better. And this will also help dictate like how long the episode is, etc. But really, we're looking to do two things. First is we have to get the niche right, e.g. the bucket that the podcast sits in, and that has to be sufficiently narrow. The second thing we need to do is get the edge. This is the thing that a listener would tell their friends about. So quick example and natural plug. Confessions of a B2B Entrepreneur is my show. The niche or the category, B2B entrepreneurship, very clear from the title. Then the edge is thing a listener would tell their friends about. So in this case, it's a confessions piece where I try to get the guest to share stuff maybe they wouldn't normally share. And so that I think is a relatively strong and clear positioning. And that then helps me drive what the episode is going to be like. And so what I do for my episodes is, again, I'm trying to get the guest to share something that maybe they haven't shared before. I typically like the episodes to be about 30 minutes in length because it's like a slightly lower lift for me as the host. I find myself getting a bit tired because we record 45 minutes and cut it down. I find myself getting a bit tired after 30 minutes. But then that also gives us sufficient time to try and dig in to get the confessions piece. So I recommend starting at a bi-weekly cadence with 30-minute episodes. Strong host that's internal to the business, and then bring on guests that A, could be customers, B, have a big audience, or C, could be partners. So that's like B2B podcasting tips in 1 minute.
I love it. So you're not as into these, like I see some people doing these bite-sized, like 10 to 15 minute thing. It just doesn't get, like, to me, it feels like it doesn't get deep enough. But I also don't want to listen to 3 hours of the Joe Rogan show, right? Either, right? Because it's not the same thing.
I think there is some benefit to releasing an episode. If you're doing 15-minute episodes, you could feasibly release them daily. I think there's some benefit in like ranking in the charts for releasing every day. But for what I'm trying to achieve with the positioning of my show, it wouldn't really work. But for somebody that maybe the whole preface of the show is that we're just going to address at a surface level one issue or one thing in their industry every day or every week, then that could work. So I think it's driven by the positioning.
Well, one thing I would say is the reason you use outside agency like Fame, I think it's really key, is because consistency is very key, right, to the rankings, and you know, like you got to post every week or whatever it is your thing is. It is just a grind. Like anyone can start a podcast, and I think we've seen that, you know, and you can hire someone off of Fiverr or something to do the edits and blah blah blah. But it is a grind to do it week after week after week, right? And recruit people. And you just, you know, like everyone knows 20 people they can have on a podcast. And then when they run out of that, the podcast ends, right? Because they don't want to go dig. And do you have the stats on how many shows get to like X number of episodes? I think there's some stats on that, right? Yeah,
I should have that, shouldn't I? That should roll off the tongue. Maybe because I'm not doing sales anymore, but
yeah, but it's a huge amount. I mean, it's like almost none of them get past a year of weekly episodes. Almost none, right?
Yeah, like that's tiny. It's like I think the majority don't get past 10 or like 6 episodes.
6 episodes, yeah. So it's like, hey, I got 6 friends I can line up, right? So I think the key to the agency, and I think what you guys have done really well, is you've nailed the guest recruiting side. And you know, it takes a little while. You got to find your niche. You got to find the right thing for that niche. Is it reaching out on your LinkedIn? Is it reaching out on X? Is it, you know, a combo? And like, what's the profile of the person? But once you get that, you guys have a team that's like dedicated to just bringing on the right kind of guests. And I think that's the crucial differentiator.
The biggest thing on guest outreach for anyone listening that's doing it themselves is social proof. Whenever I get asked to be on a podcast, first thing I'm doing is looking at other people that have been on it. And if I see anybody that I like look up to or know, I'm probably going to say yes. And so thank you for that, Alan.
Yeah, it was great having you on, man. All right, see ya.
You've been listening to the Small Business Mentor podcast, brought to you by Alan Pence. For more insights on how to navigate your business through its black holes, visit @apence on X. Don't forget to search for Small Business Mentor in your podcast app to subscribe. Thank you for joining us, and here's to your next leap in business growth.